this guy is one of the best in the world. And when I watch my legacy in lightweight division, I think, hey, like I have to fight with Tony Ferguson. You know, if I want become greatest lightweight ever, I have to beat this guy. That's why I'm here.
As unbelievable as it may seem, the highly anticipated showdown between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson appears to be cancelled yet again. This marks the 5th time that the UFC has been forced to call off the fight between the two. For now, I don't think any of us know what to expect in the coming months, as the UFC tries to tackle regulations and limitations set by the coronavirus. But hopefully, once the coronavirus blows over, we can finally see Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson settle their unfinished business. But for the meantime, we thought it would be a good opportunity to take a look back at a timeline between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, and go over all of the previous attempts to make this fight happen. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at the complete timeline of Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. The first meeting between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson was officially announced in August of 2015. Originally scheduled to compete on December the 11th on the main event of the Ultimate Fighter 22 finale, a season that was coached by Conor McGregor and Uriah Faber. At the time, Khabib was 22-0 and had won 6 straight fights in the UFC, but unfortunately had been sidelined for a year due to a knee injury. Meanwhile, Tony was riding a 6-fight winning streak of his own, with his only loss inside the UFC coming against Michael Johnson. Just a little over a month out from the event, Khabib sustained a rib injury in training, which forced him to withdraw from the fight. He later took to Instagram to apologise for his removal, even going so far as to say that he wasn't sure if he'd come back. As a result, he was replaced by Edson Barboza. What followed was a sensational fight between Ferguson and Barboza, which Tony ultimately won by submission. With the win, Tony proceeded to call out lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos. However, after it was confirmed that Dos Anjos would instead be defending his title against Conor McGregor, the UFC decided to try rebooking Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. The two were set to compete on UFC on Fox 19 in April of 2016. But in a stroke of bad luck, the fight was scrapped once again, this time due to a lung issue from Tony Ferguson. Khabib instead fought fellow lightweight Daryl Horcher on 11 days' notice, finishing him by TKO in round 2. A few months later, Tony Ferguson returned to action, finishing UFC newcomer Lando Venata at UFC Fight Night 91. The win prompted Ferguson to name a list of potential opponents for his next fight, which of course included Khabib Nurmagomedov. Tony Ferguson's next opponent was former lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos, who had recently lost his title to Eddie Alvarez just a few months prior. The two competed in the main event of UFC Fight Night 98, which Tony won in a dominant fashion. Only a week after Tony Ferguson's win, Khabib managed to pick up an impressive win of his own, finishing lightweight standout Michael Johnson at UFC 205. In his post-fight speech, he went on to take aim at Conor McGregor, who was also competing at UFC 205 and had stirred up quite a bit of controversy in the lightweight division. But his anticipated showdown with Conor McGregor would have to wait, seeing as he now had unfinished business with Ferguson. Soon after, the UFC attempted to book a fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. This was the 3rd time they had tried to do so, but again there was a problem. Tony Ferguson was unwilling to fight unless he made the exact same amount of money as Khabib. Tony's demands put a temporary halt on negotiations. In response, Khabib sent out a tweet offering Tony an extra $200,000 if he accepted the fight. Despite a few financial hurdles, the UFC finally came to terms with Tony Ferguson. In January of 2017, they announced the official 3rd booking of Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, with the two set to face off as the co-main event of UFC 209. Only this time, the two would be fighting for the interim lightweight title, as Conor McGregor pursued a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather. But it wasn't meant to be, as the fight was cancelled yet again, this time due to a weight-cutting issue that left Khabib hospitalised. Surprisingly, Tony kept things classy, tweeting out a message of encouragement for Khabib. At least that was until Tony saw a video of what appeared to be Khabib eating tiramisu before his weight cut. Then, in an episode of the MMA Hour, Tony called the move both disrespectful and unprofessional, though Khabib denied ever actually eating it. While Khabib sat on the sidelines in order to recover, Tony Ferguson was paired off with rising contender Kevin Lee, as they battled it out for the interim lightweight title. The two were set to fight in the main event of UFC 216, with the winner expected to face Conor McGregor upon his return. Although he found himself in some trouble in round 1, he managed to sink in a triangle choke in round 3 and capture the interim title. The win was followed by an intense call-out of Conor McGregor, who had recently suffered a TKO loss to Floyd Mayweather in his pro boxing debut. After nearly a year of recovery, Khabib returned to action in December of 2017, taking on Edson Barboza in the co-main event of UFC 219. Despite the long layoff, Khabib put on a dominant performance and defeated Barboza in a lopsided victory. In his post-fight speech, Khabib delivered a call-out of both Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor, claiming that if the UFC would allow it, he would fight them both on the same night. Shortly after, UFC President Dana White announced a fourth booking of Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, with the two set to headline UFC 223 on April 7th, with the winner being granted the undisputed lightweight title. This would also simultaneously strip Conor McGregor of his lightweight belt, which he hadn't defended since 2016. In an unbelievable turn of events, the fight was cancelled for yet a fourth time. The news came after Tony Ferguson injured his knee whilst tripping over a cable. Apparently, it was a freak accident that occurred while Tony Ferguson was fulfilling media obligations, with the injury happening just a few days out from the fight. The injury resulted in a torn ligament that ultimately required surgery. And that was only the beginning of what turned out to be a chaotic week. After Ferguson was pulled out from the bout, featherweight champion Max Holloway stepped into his place. Unfortunately, Max was also removed last minute due to a weight-cutting complication, which left the UFC scrambling to find a replacement. In the end, they went with Al Iaquinta, who was already scheduled to compete on the same card. Of course, all of this was overshadowed by a bus attack courtesy of Conor McGregor. But all of that aside, Khabib went on to dominate Al Iaquinta and become the undisputed lightweight champion. From there, the two continued to extend their remarkable winning streaks. While Khabib racked up 2 title defences against Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson scored impressive victories over fellow lightweights Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone. Truthfully speaking, from the moment their first fight was announced in 2015, the two have essentially run through everyone that's been put in front of them. As of right now, both Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson are riding a 12-fight winning streak in the UFC, and this has left them with nowhere else to turn except, of course, to face each other. In November of 2019, Dana White announced that the two were scheduled to compete for a 5th and hopefully final time. The two were set to face off in the main event of UFC 249. But as I'm sure most of us now know, the coronavirus recently put a damper on those plans. Despite several events getting postponed, UFC President Dana White had been adamant during the past month that the fight would go on as planned. But after several MMA gyms were forced to close in the US, Khabib commuted back to his home country of Russia to resume his training. Unfortunately, due to the global spread of the virus, travel restrictions in Russia have now barred Khabib from leaving, meaning that he can no longer compete at UFC 249. And with the US also implementing similar travel bans, the fight will most likely be postponed until a later date. This is an extremely disappointing outcome to a fight that many have been eager to see. But I suppose if we waited this long, then we can afford to wait a little bit longer. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching guys, and we'll see you on the next video.